Now that the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra is here, how does the best from Samsung compare to the best from Apple in the iPhone 14 Pro Max? What's up guys, Saf here on SuperSaf TV, and we're going to be breaking down all of the key differences between these two SuperSaf styles. Right, let's start off with the build and design. So firstly, both of these are quite big phones. They weigh almost the same. The S23 Ultra is slightly bigger in terms of the dimensions. Now I'm somebody who likes bigger phones, but if you're used to a smaller phone, you might want to test these out in hand first. Now for the design, I do like both. The designs are quite familiar. The S23 Ultra looks a lot like the S22 Ultra, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max looks a lot like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, at least from the back. Not necessarily a bad thing, but we do have some fresh colors. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is available in 4 colors. There's a silver, a gold, a space black, as well as this deep purple, which I think is one of my favorites. The S23 Ultra also comes officially in 4 colors: a phantom black, a cream, a green, as well as a lavender. However, there are 4 additional exclusive colors available from Samsung.com. There's a graphite, sky blue, a lime, as well as a red. Now, if you are thinking of getting the S23 Ultra, you can get up to $150 of instant Samsung credit using my exclusive affiliate link down in the description below. Shameless plug there. Now for the build, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a stainless steel frame. The S23 Ultra has an aluminium frame. The S23 Ultra is one of the first devices in the world with Gorilla Glass Victus 2 in the front and back, and this helps improve drop performance on rough surfaces like concrete. It's also made with 22% recycled glass. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has ceramic shield. Now in my experience, both of these are quite durable. I'm not somebody who does drop tests, but I'm sure others will be. So if you're interested in how durable these exactly are, you're gonna have to wait for those. What I do like about both of these is that we've got matte finishes across the board for all of the different colors, and I think that looks so much better than glossy, although the frames are glossy and can get some fingerprints. Now the iPhone 14 Pro Max has a flat front and back. The S23 Ultra has a slight curve on the edges. However, this is not as much as what we had on the S22 Ultra. And personally speaking, I do prefer this compared to last year. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has the rounded corners, whereas we've got more squared off corners on the S23 Ultra. In terms of comfortability, I'd say both of them are pretty much the same. Now both devices do have an IP68 water and dust resistant rating. However, there is more to it than just that number. You can actually submerge the iPhone 14 Pro Max 4 times deeper into water compared to the S23 Ultra, so that's around 6 meters compared to 1.5. Now, I'm not sure how useful that's going to be to you if you're planning to take your device for a swim, but something definitely to mention. Now let's turn these devices around and take a look at the displays. So firstly, let's look at the similarities. Both are using OLED technology, which means colors really do pop, and both have an adaptive refresh rate which goes all the way up to 120 Hz, making things very smooth, and also all the way down to just 1 Hz, making things very efficient, and also allowing always on displays. So both devices do have great always on displays. They're different in the way they're implemented. Apple initially just had a dimmed wallpaper, which I personally found quite distracting, and I did mention this in my review. They have since released a software update which lets you have a blank always on display. Now the S23 Ultra does have a slightly higher resolution, which means things are going to be slightly sharper. You might not notice them on the day-to-day. And the iPhone 14 Pro Max actually has a slightly brighter display with a peak brightness of 2000 nits versus 1750 nits. So if you are somebody like me who wears sunglasses all the time and uses your device outdoors in bright sunlight, then you're gonna appreciate that slight edge on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now when it comes to screen to body ratio, the S23 Ultra, you do get more screen because the borders are slimmer, and because of the curve, they look even slimmer. And we've only got a small punch out for the front facing camera. On the iPhone 14 Pro Max, we do have this center cutout, which is called the dynamic island. Now, although it takes up more space compared to the S23 Ultra, it does have some functionality. You can get some previews in it, and you can also tap and expand it. So for example, if you're playing some music, that's going to continue in the dynamic island, and then you can tap to expand it. Now, I personally don't find myself interacting with the dynamic island too much, purely because it is the upmost part of the screen, so it's the least reachable. However, I do like some of the different animations and the previews that you get, especially when you're playing music. Now, another reason why we have this pill-shaped cutout on the iPhone 14 Pro Max is because we have Face ID. So all of the sensors are behind there as well. The S23 Ultra has an ultrasonic in-display fingerprint scanner. This is the 3D Sonic Sensor Gen 2, and it is personally one of my favorite fingerprint scanners on any smartphone. Now, which one you prefer, the Face ID or the fingerprint scanner, is going to come down to your day-to-day. I personally would edge towards the fingerprint scanner purely because I do like using my phone when I'm in bed and my face is halfway in the pillow. Using Face ID, you have to kind of get out, whereas on the S23 Ultra, I don't need to do that. Right, now let's talk about the cameras. Hey, SuperSaf here. Are you supposed to be editing? I just want to remind you guys that we have done a SuperSaf style camera comparison between these two, which you can check out after this video. And also maybe consider subscribing, because we, by we I mean me, are working very hard on lots more content, so you don't want to miss. Yeah, these videos are not going to edit themselves, so yeah, get back to it. So as SuperSaf was saying, if you haven't already, then do consider subscribing for more content like this. And also, I have worked on a detailed SuperSaf style camera comparison of both of these devices. It's 18 minutes long and I cover all aspects. You can go ahead and check that out. But to give you a quick breakdown, I think both devices take great photos and videos. Both have an ultra-wide camera, a primary camera, as well as a telephoto camera, but the S23 Ultra does have two telephoto cameras and it can give you better extended zoom. I also did prefer the S23 Ultra for the ultra-wide camera, and the primary camera on the S23 Ultra does have a much higher resolution, 200 megapixels, which does give you a lot of detail. However, there is quite a bit of shutter lag on the S23 Ultra. So if you do like taking pictures of kids and pets, you're probably going to get a better result with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. And I also still do prefer the video overall on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It was more consistent. It also has better cinematic mode and a better stabilization. The S23 Ultra does now have 8K at 30 frames a second, which is great for lots of detail. But when I'm looking at an overall package for video, the iPhone 14 Pro Max would be my preference. And for photos, I would overall pick the S23 Ultra, if you must know. But once again, I want to emphasize that I wouldn't mind going with either of these, and you can check out that full camera comparison if you're interested to know the details. Right, now let's move on to performance. So the iPhone 14 Pro Max is powered by the A16 Bionic chip. The S23 Ultra is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 4 Galaxy. This is a custom chip. Good news is this is the chip that you get across the board. Traditionally, Samsung devices would have an Exynos chip in Europe, and in the US, you would have the Qualcomm chip. That generally made things inconsistent and quite difficult to assess performance. But in my experience, both have been really good and handle anything that I've thrown at them. I'm personally not a gamer, but my friend Thunder E from Board at Work is. He's actually done a detailed gaming test on both of these devices. I'll leave those videos linked down in the description below if you want to check those out. But in terms of my day-to-day usage, these have been absolutely fine. However, the iPhone 14 Pro Max does have less RAM compared to the S23 Ultra. And I have noticed this in certain situations, such as, for example, uploading stories onto Instagram. You have to kind of stay there until it's fully uploaded on the iPhone. Otherwise, it just won't carry on doing it in the background. So the iPhone is quite aggressive with its RAM management. With the S23 Ultra, I can just post and go away, do something else, and it will carry on in the background. Now, this might be due to the more RAM that we have, or it might also have things to do with the software. And we do have different software on both of these devices, of course. We've got Android versus iOS. So on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the current version is iOS 16.3. The S23 Ultra comes with Android 13 out of the box with One UI 5.1. Now, I'm not going to go into a battle about which one's better. I think a lot of it does come down to your personal usage. I'm somebody who uses both Android and iOS, and I think these are some of the best examples that we have of both operating systems. Now, usually I would emphasize on the fact that you're going to be getting updates on the iPhone 14 Pro Max a lot longer than the S23 Ultra, and that will still be the case. However, Samsung has actually made a big commitment to provide 4 Android OS updates as well as 5 years of security updates, which is really impressive. Of course, with the iPhone, because this is part of the ecosystem, you will be getting updates for potentially even longer than that. Now, I want to talk about some of the additional features that both devices offer. So, the S23 Ultra does have something that you're not going to get on any iPhone, and that is the S Pen. Now, this gives you a level of precision you're just not going to get, and it's just got 2.8 milliseconds of latency. So if you want to jot down some quick notes, do some doodles, edit some images, or even sign some documents, you're going to be able to do that much more easily on the S23 Ultra. This also works remotely, so you can use it as a remote trigger for the cameras, which is nice. And there's also handwriting recognition, which is built into the software. I'm somebody who really likes the S Pen, even though I don't use it all the time. Now, because the S23 Ultra is a Samsung flagship device, it does also come with DeX. DeX will allow you to have a full desktop experience wirelessly from your smartphone onto a big screen, and also allow you to control the mouse using your device as a touchpad. Now, it's so crazy how many people don't actually know this. I actually told my friends about this and he was just mind blown by DeX. Now, the iPhone 14 Pro Max also has some additional features that you don't have on the S23 Ultra. The first is crash detection. So if in the unfortunate event you are involved in a car crash, the iPhone can contact emergency services on your behalf. What's funny is that it has been triggering this on some roller coasters. I'm not sure what the latest is about that, but that was something. And the iPhone also has emergency SOS via satellite. Now, this is something that's really cool. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and you lose signal completely and you need to contact emergency services, the iPhone is actually going to be able to connect onto satellite. I've personally, thankfully, not had to use this as yet, but it is available across many regions now. For the speakers, we have stereo speakers on both. There's one in the earpiece and one bottom firing. I think both of them sound really good to me. I'm no audiophile. My buddy Thunder E from Board at Work is, and he has done a detailed speaker test. I'm going to link that down in the description below. In a nutshell, from what he said, is that both of them are very, very close, but the iPhone is fuller, whatever that means. But anyway, the other thing I want to talk about is the ports on both of these devices. So the S23 Ultra has the more universal USB Type-C. The iPhone 14 Pro Max still has Lightning, which for me is quite frustrating because being an Apple user for other devices like my MacBook Pro and my iPad Pro as well, they all use USB Type-C, but we still have the very outdated Lightning port on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It looks like Apple is going to either be forced to use USB Type-C or they're just going to go portless. But currently, as it stands, the S23 Ultra does get the advantage for having much more of a universal port. Right, now let's talk about battery size and performance. So the S23 Ultra does have a larger physical battery compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but of course, both of them are running completely different hardware and software, which means that the battery size no longer becomes relevant. Now, in terms of battery life, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has given me great battery life. The S23 Ultra so far is actually keeping up and giving me similar battery life to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, this is early days, but the S22 Ultra was definitely not as good as the S23 Ultra. And also the fact that we've got that consistent, efficient chipset, the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, it does mean that, again, in my experience so far, it is keeping up with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, and I think both of these have excellent battery life. Now, for charging, the S23 Ultra gets the advantage because it can support the faster 45-watt charging, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro Max can just do around 20 watts. So the iPhone 14 Pro Max, 50% is going to take around 30 minutes, whereas it's just going to take 20 minutes on the S23 Ultra. For wireless charging, the S23 Ultra does have support for up to 15 watts of Qi wireless charging. The iPhone 14 Pro Max can charge at 15 watts, but only with MagSafe. MagSafe is really cool and it just snaps on, but it is proprietary. The S23 Ultra also supports wireless power share, so you can share the power from the S23 Ultra to another device, even the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It's something that I very rarely use, but it can be useful if you're out and about and you just want to top up your earbuds or something. Now, one thing to mention, if you don't already know, chargers do not come included out of the boxes, so you are going to have to get those chargers separately if you don't already have them. Right, now let's look at storage and pricing. So the S23 Ultra actually starts at a higher base model, 256 gigabytes compared to the 128 of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, but both of them do go all the way up to 1 terabyte. As you probably already know or should know, neither of these have expandable storage. Previous Samsung devices many years ago did have expandable storage, but we've not had that for quite some time. And for pricing, if we compare the 256 gigabyte models, they actually start at the same price in the US. However, in the UK and other regions, the iPhone 14 Pro Max does come in higher compared to the equivalent storage models of the S23 Ultra. And Samsung are also currently offering the 512 gigabyte version for the price of the 256 gigabyte version. And if you do use my affiliate link down in the description below, you can also get up to $150 of instant Samsung credit. So when you combine all of that, you are going to be paying less overall for the S23 Ultra compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So that is the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max. What are my opinions? Well, personally speaking, I really do like both of these devices, and both of them will be in my pockets going forward. Of course, both have their advantages and disadvantages. However, a lot of it is going to come down to your preference of operating system. If you could pick one of these, which one would you go for? Drop me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. I have done that detailed camera comparison between these two. I'll leave that linked here. I'll also leave another related video linked here. If you want to see more videos like this, then don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon. We do have even more S23 coverage. SuperSaf is working very hard on editing. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then do smash that like button for me. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV, and I'll see you next time.